Okay, I decided to do one more thing this week while we're talking about classes and building a class, and that is something called a constructor. When we created our class for our album, we created the class using this command here. My favorite album is a new album, a new instance of the album class. And then when we created that object, that instance of the class, it was empty until we put values into the variables. So if I run it and print the album without putting anything into those variables, I just get nulls. Null string for the title, null string for the artist, 0 for the date. And at first, we made those variables public and put values in directly, and then we made those variables private and put values in those variables using set methods. So my favorite album is the object. Set year is a method. It takes the parameter 2014. It says, hey, you album, put 2014 in your year. We can go to the album.java file and see that the set method right here for set year takes a year input and puts it into the year. The set artist takes the artist input, puts it into the value for artist. It would be better if when we created the object in the first place, if rather than putting those instance variables in one at a time, we could just create the object with those variables in place. So I'm going to come back to my main program. I'm going to delete all this. I'm running it again just to show that if I create it without those set methods, what I get is an empty value, null string, 0 for the year, 0 for the rating. But now I'm going to do the work of filling that object with values when I create it. And the way I do that is by creating a special method inside the class called a constructor. So here I am back in my album class. I know it's not easy because you can't see my cursor to see when I'm changing files up here, but this is my album class. Here's my method that does the print album method. I'm going to create a special method called a constructor. And when you create a constructor for your class, you give it, that's not how you spell constructor, you give it the same name as your class. So it's going to be public album. In fact, what we were doing before, if we go back to main, what we're doing here is we're actually calling a constructor. Java has a default constructor that creates an empty object when you don't define the constructor. But now we're going to define our own constructor. And we're going to pass it parameters that correspond to our instance variables. So the album constructor method has 4 parameters. It's going to be the year, the artist, the title, the rating that I'm giving it to put into the instance variables of the new object. So we need an integer, and let's call it new year, and then a comma, and then a string that we'll call new artist. Oh, what comes first? Yeah, artist. And then a string called new title, and then a double called new rating, close parentheses. And then I need my open and close brackets for my constructor methods. I need my curly braces. We'll just do it like this. Okay. So the album constructor method takes 4 parameters and it's going to put them into the instance variables. My instance variables are year. So year is going to be equal to new year, the value that was passed to it. Watch my typing. And so on. In fact, I'm just going to copy it. Artist is going to be equal to new artist. Title is going to be equal to new title, and so on. Okay, so the constructor method takes as its input values for all of the instance variables that you have in your class, and it takes those parameters and it puts them in the values for year, artist, title, rating. Okay, so that's my constructor. Now, when I create my object of my album class, which happens here, album, my favorite album equals new album, that's my constructor. I now give it the values for the variables that I want to put into that object. So they were, let's say, I think year comes first. I think it was 2014. And then I think artist came next, Taylor Swift. And then the album title, 1989. It's a little confusing that I chose an album whose title is a number. 1989. And then the rating is a double, 4.5. So this single line of code says I'm going to create a new album object called my favorite album, and I'm going to create it by passing these values to the constructor. Notice all my set methods are gone, but I run it now, and I should, if I didn't make any mistakes typing this, I should get 1989 by Taylor Swift, released 2014, 4.5 stars. Okay, so this single line of code names the new object, runs the constructor for the new object, and puts these instance variable values into the newly constructed instance of the album class. Okay, so again, good practice whenever you write a class, whenever you create a class, first thing, write a constructor for it so that you can put values into every new instance of that class that you create, and then create set and get methods in case you ever want to change those values later. If you know that in your program those values should never ever get changed after they are created, then you can not have set methods at all. If you know that the values of those variables should never ever be accessed from outside of the object's own methods, then you don't need those get methods. That's usually not the case, especially in a class like this, where a course like this. I should stop calling computer science 222 a class. I should start calling it a course. And a course like ours, most of the time we won't have classes that are that possessive of their variables that you never need to have them from the outside, but you might. And it's your prerogative when you create the class to decide maybe some of the variables have set methods and some of them don't. Maybe some of them have get methods and some of them don't, depending on whether or not anything outside the program ever needs them. Okay? But the constructor should be part of your process when you create a class. And again, these can be anything you want. As far as the names. In fact, you might just want to give them a really, since they're just temporary, I call them Y, A, T, and R. And year equals Y, artist equals A, title equals T, rating equals R. Okay? They don't need to be terribly descriptive because they're just temporary values for the parameters that are going to be stuck into the variable. If I go run my program now, notice I've changed. Nothing has to change outside of my class definition because everything is happening inside that class. So if I run it now, nothing should change. Give it a couple seconds to do its thing. Yeah, there you go. So it still works exactly the way it did before. All I did was change how that constructor refers to its own parameters. I'm still passing the same values to that parameters when I create my new object. Okay, so that is a constructor, and in your first assignment where you create your own class, I'll ask you to create it not with just instance variables and maybe a print method, but to create your own constructor so that when you create a new instance of your class, that object has its instance variables already in place.